You're listening to the Weekly Brew.
It seems as if there is almost no offseason in the NFL as free agency officially kicked off last week. One of the teams making perhaps the biggest splash was the Houston Texans. Now joining us on the Weekly Brew to discuss the Houston Texans and more is John McClain, who covers the Texans and the NFL for the Houston Chronicle. John, welcome back to the show, and how are you doing this week?
I'm doing great, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Definitely glad to have you back on the show, and I guess the obvious first question for you right now is Brock Osweiler. Texans signed him to a 4-year contract last week for $72 million. Is this the right move for the Texans, who have been needing a quarterback for essentially their entire history of the franchise?
In one fell swoop, they solved their two biggest problems, quarterback and running back. Now they can use the draft for whatever else they want. Had they waited until the draft, Bob McNair said they would have had to trade at least 3 picks to move up, and that's 3 potential quality players. They liked Osweiler. They played against him in the last 2 preseasons. They practiced against him in 2014 preseason. After the season, after Brian Hoyer threw 4 interceptions and lost a fumble in that 30-0 playoff loss to Kansas City, after Bill O'Brien and his staff did film work of all their players, then they do film work of the guys who are potential free agents. And he put Osweiler at the top of the quarterbacks. He told Rick Smith, this is the guy I'd like to have if they don't re-sign him ahead of time. A lot of people thought they would have re-signed him last year, but in essence, Peyton Manning waiting until the last minute hurt them because they couldn't do anything cap-wise with Osweiler until Manning made his decision. And when he did it so late, by then, you know, that ship was sailing, and it was sailing to Houston. And John Elway made an initial offer of $39 million over 3 years. With bonuses, it could push it to 45. They didn't take it. And then they could talk parameters with Rick Smith, and I think he made it clear the Texans were going to get Osweiler because O'Brien and offense coordinator George Godsey liked him. He was coached by Adam Gase. He was coached by Gary Kubiak. He watched for 4 years and learned with Peyton Manning. He said in his news conference on Thursday, Peyton taught me how to be a pro. And so when he went to Denver's second-round pick, Josh McDaniels was the head coach. The system he put in was the New England system, which is the system they have in Houston. So he has a foundation with that system. But you know, Bill O'Brien and George Godsey have done a good job coaching a lot of mediocre quarterbacks. They've gotten the best out of all of them. There's no reason to think they can't get the best out of Brock Osweiler.
Before the free agent acquisition of Brock Osweiler, all the talk was you got to go out in the first round of the draft and get yourself a quarterback. So I'm curious, having picked up an established guy who's been in the league, who's learned under Peyton, who kind of has those reps, how far ahead of schedule does this put the Texans relative to taking a guy in the first round and having to develop him internally?
He started 7 games. He's had good coaches. He's had a great mentor in Peyton Manning. He knows he's had a good defense. He's got a good defense here, not dominating like the Broncos, and he's not had a running back like Lamar Miller, so he should be much more polished and adaptable than a rookie would be. Now, it doesn't mean in 3 years a rookie wouldn't be better, but the truth is, if they had stayed at 22, they wouldn't have gotten one of the top 3 quarterbacks. They would have had Connor Cook or Christian Hackenberg if they wanted a quarterback in the first round. That would have been a reach for both of them. And they wanted Osweiler. That's what Bill O'Brien had told me how much he liked him. He couldn't say it publicly, but he did. He told me quite a while ago, and I said, no way he's leaving Denver. Everybody said, no way he's leaving Denver. They don't have enough quarterback. Ultimately, and Bob McNair told me this after the news conference Thursday, he said, I think Denver realized we had more cap room, and we were going to do whatever it took to get him. And that's why John Elway bowed out at 16.5. Maybe he thought if he went to 18, they would have gone to 19. So Bob McNair, his resources, and having money under the cap for the first time since 2011 when they signed Jonathan Joseph and Danielle Manning to improve the league's worst secondary, that made a huge difference for Rick Smith, the general manager.
One of my questions specifically about the Osweiler deal is about his contract, the $72 million. Just from an outsider perspective, it seems like quarterbacks are getting paid more and more every year. And I think back to Matt Flynn a few years ago, who signed that 3-year contract with the Seattle Seahawks, who was ultimately beat out by Russell Wilson. And he actually sent a tweet out last Wednesday saying, quote, "Wow, I now know that I'm going to get killed for this, and I don't have a lot of room to talk, but the latest QB contract is unbelievable." What do you make of, the quarterbacks getting $18, $19 million a year? And do you think, for the Texans in particular, do you think that Brock Osweiler is worth the $72 million, $36 million guaranteed?
Doesn't matter what I think, it's what they think. Bill O'Brien knows a lot more about it than I do, so does George Godsey. Peter King wrote last week, John Elway thinks Brock Osweiler will be a star. And Gary Kubiak told me after the Super Bowl how much he liked him. So if Elway and Kubiak thought he was going to be a star, and Bill O'Brien and George Godsey think he's going to be a star, who might argue with that? They've watched all the film. They've talked to the people. They ought to know. Now, it doesn't mean he won't bomb out. So many free agents do. But that's the guy they've targeted. Elway sounded kind of like a spurned lover. His statement that we only want people that want to be here. Osweiler said he wanted to start over. He wanted to start over in Houston and with this offense. And I don't blame Elway for being upset. You groom a guy for 4 years and you're ready to make him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, but he goes somewhere else for more money. And remember, you're talking about that kind of money and no state income tax. That might be worth several million in the whole scheme of things as well. Players never admit, of course, it's all about the money. But, of course, it's always about the money. And the Texans did what needed to be done. Now it's up to Bill O'Brien to coach him up. And I'll say this. I interviewed Osweiler at the airport when he arrived. I interviewed him at the news conference. He is a very, very polished, impressive guy. And everybody I talked to in Denver, in the organization and in the media, they all speak of him in such reverential manners about what kind of person he is. And Bill O'Brien's all about being a good teammate. Now he's got to become that leader O'Brien wants. He's got to be able to do the things he wants in the system.
So, John, with the addition of Osweiler, we still have 2 quarterbacks currently on the roster. We have Brian Hoyer, previously mentioned, and Tom Savage. What is the value of those 2 players at this point, and what's their future, whether it be with the program or in the league?
I think they'll trade Hoyer. There's going to be teams that need quarterbacks. There's going to be teams that get hurt that need quarterbacks. Hoyer's coming off his best season. Try not to think about the playoff game, and he had 19 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, his highest rating, 91. So if you can get a guy like that for a low pick, that'd be a pretty good deal. They got a low pick for Case Keenum, low pick for Ryan Fitzpatrick. They want to get one for Brian Hoyer. So Tom Savage will be the backup, and I would imagine they will sign another veteran, and the one I wish they would sign is Brandon Whedon, who did an impressive job in a short period of time after he was claimed on waivers from Dallas.
Kind of moving on, the Texans also made a lot of movement at the start of free agency, and I can't think of a year in which the Texans have had this much action on the first day of free agency, and kind of filling the void that Arian Foster left when the Texans cut him 2 weeks ago. They signed Lamar Miller, who absolutely torched the Texans last year in a game. He had 175 yards rushing and a touchdown for 14 carries, but he's also a guy that can receive out of the backfield. How do you think he plays into this system, and can he be a guy that replaces or at least comes close to what Arian Foster did while healthy?
He's 5'11", 225, and he's a speed back. He's the fastest running back the Texans will have ever had as a starter. In each of the last 2 years, 97-yard touchdown, 85-yard touchdown. Texans averaged 3.7 yards a carry last season. Only 2 teams were worse. They ran for 7 touchdowns. Miller's had more rushing touchdowns than 7 each of the last 2 years. He averaged 4.5 yards a carry this year, 5.1 last year. Now, they never had him being a guy that touched the ball 25 times a game. Well, he doesn't need to do that. Alfred Blue can go from starter to backup, a better role for him. They've got some other backs on the roster, like Akeem Hunt, who's even faster than Lamar Miller. So there's no need for him to come in here and be a 25-carry workhorse. They need him to hit some home runs, something they've never had.
Kind of diving into the advanced metrics, and you said that the Texans don't need him to, take on that extreme workload, but if you look at the advanced metrics from last year, he averaged 5.4 yards a carry in the first half, but when you go to the third quarter, that drops to 3.5 yards and then 2.6 yards in the fourth quarter. Is that cause for concern?
Well, the Texans will look at that, and that might have to do with the opponent, the score, the way halftime adjustments. You never know. Could be conditioning. I don't know. I know he had 14 carries for 175 yards against the Texans, including an 85-yard run, 3 catches, 61 yards and a touchdown. And they don't base it on one game, but he did impress the heck out of them. So, Bill O'Brien will utilize him a lot as a receiver as he did Foster. And if he sees his carries going down, he'll find a way to get around it.
So in the offensive line, you see a lot of shuffling of the deck chairs there. You lose guard Brandon Brooks, center Ben Jones. You gain Kansas City Chiefs guard Jeff Allen, former Oakland Raiders center Tony Bergstrom. I mean, is there a net gain or loss in that transaction? And do you worry about bringing together players that have not played together in the same system for a period of time?
Well, they had guys that played together last year, and they didn't play very well. A lot of that had to do with injuries. Jeff Allen, a real tough guy from Kansas City, physical, nasty. They wanted to get physical up front. He'll start at right guard. I don't know about Tony Bergstrom. He's a backup. He's been hurt. They'll use a mid-level pick on a center, and they've got another guy named Greg Matz entering his second season. But I was surprised Ben Jones left. Brandon Brooks got $8 million a year. Texans said no, they're not going to do that. And I think one of their top 2 picks will be an offensive tackle. And if he's versatile enough to play guard or play guard, Xavier Su'a-Filo move to center, that would be better. I think the first pick now will be a really fast wide receiver who can return kickoffs and punts, but they need help in the offensive line.
So the Texans have enough picks to do some damage in the draft, and with the quarterback position taken care of, what does that mean in terms of their strategy for approaching the draft and where they might focus their energy?
They've got 7 picks as it stands. They might be able to get another one for Hoyer. And instead of having to package their 1 and a 1 in the future, and a 2 this year, maybe a 3 or a 2 in the future to move up, they get to keep their picks. Their issues in order are wide receiver, offensive line, specifically tackle. They need a defensive end, a safety, a center, and if they had another nose tackle, that would be even better. But now they can address those much easier than they could if they had to depend on the draft to yield a quarterback that they want.
And speaking of the draft, that's a point in which you do fill a lot of those needs with young players, but in a way that you get that immediate fixes through free agency. And we've seen the Texans be active already at the start of free agency last week. Do you foresee Rick Smith or Bill O'Brien making any other moves, bringing in veteran players leading up to OTAs and fall camp?
Yeah, they'll bring in some more guys. This is the first time they've been active like this on the first day. But they're a little under $10 million under the cap after all these deals, and a lot of that is earmarked for rookie pool, practice squad players, players on reserve lists. So you can't spend it all, but you can make it count for a couple of more. Guys like Raheem Moore, Vince Wilfork, Nate Washington, Cecil Shorts, those mid-level free agents at the time of the signing. I think we'll see them sign anywhere from 2 to 3 of those kind of free agents.
So Osweiler, upon arriving, said he felt something special was happening here in Houston with the Texans. This is the most excited I can remember the fan base being in a long, long time, sort of getting in this quarterback position, the most important position taken care of. I mean, do you think all that excitement is warranted? What do you feel the ceiling is for the team this season and in the next couple of years now that we have that quarterback locked up?
First of all, it gets people really fired up. Nothing like a new quarterback to do that. And Bob McNair said, I think this will help us go farther in the playoffs. Well, all he had to do is go to the second round to go farther. What this should help them do gives them a better chance to successfully defend their AFC South title because they got Andrew Luck coming back healthy. If Andrew Luck's healthy, Indianapolis is going to be the favorite because we don't know how well Brock Osweiler will play. And they're competing for the division title. If they don't get that, they're competing for a wild card. And then when they get in the playoffs, they think their quarterback's not going to spit the bit, as Hoyer did last year, and they'll have a chance to advance beyond that first round.
You had mentioned the AFC South, and I know one of the teams last year that kind of impressed me was the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, although they finished 5-11 on the year, their offense was just lights out for most of the year. You know, they've got a lot of cap room this year for the offseason. How do you think that they've, kind of shaped up moving into next year, having all of that cap space and, kind of starting to make moves and be rumored to make moves during free agency?
Jaguars always make moves. They made more this year because they have to spend the money. Everybody gets all fired up, and everybody thinks that Gus Bradley's going to have his first winning record, and they're bad again. I think they'll get good when Blake Bortles stops throwing interceptions. He's got good receivers. They had Chris Ivory go with T.J. Yeldon at running back, but I don't think they're a threat to win the division. They need to get up in the 8-8 range first. And then there's the Titans. The Titans, like the Jaguars, they have their quarterback in place. They're making moves to help Marcus Mariota, giving him DeMarco Murray to run, and they got the first pick in every round. I can see them drafting Ole Miss left tackle Laramie Tunsil, moving Taylor Lewan to right. Then they would have 2 first-round picks at bookend tackles, and actually help Mariota, as should DeMarco Murray with the running game.
John, you recently spent some time at the draft combine, and I've heard a lot of noise from pundits about how those observables, those measurables don't necessarily translate concretely to play on the field. So I'm just curious, I mean, when you're out there, do you see things that get you excited? And how important do you think those performances in the combine are to players' futures in the NFL?
It's a piece of the puzzle, a process. Now, the NFL acts like it's not as big a deal as it is, but it is. Guys have great combines. All of a sudden, they're in the media. They're in the consciousness of the public. Their stock goes up and down based on the way they run. So, yeah, there are some guys like Robert Nicomdici, the defensive lineman from Ole Miss. He had terrible interviews in which it make you question his judgment all the time based on his interview. And some guys worked out great, some didn't. And when you're fast, but you got to have more to it. If you're strong, the strongest guys never make the NFL. And if they do, they don't last. The fast guys, though, the fast speed is a great barometer, especially for the skill positions in the secondary.
One more question to wrap things up here, but we are a Houston-based podcast. We have a lot of listeners in Texas, which means we have a lot of Baylor Bears and Texas A&M Aggie fans that listen to us. And one of the questions that I have for you is, one, where does RG3 end up? And secondly, does Johnny Manziel play in the NFL next year?
The Browns haven't cut Manziel because they claim 2 or 3 teams have shown interest. Based on what Manziel has done off the field, I wouldn't touch him with a 100-foot pole. And if somebody does, and it backfires on them the way it does on Cleveland, they deserve exactly what they get because he is toxic. Has shown no reason to make us think he wants to play football. RG3, I saw him last week. I told him you need to go somewhere with a coach who believes in a mobile quarterback. Gary Kubiak would be ideal for him to resurrect his career. But he's going to go in as a backup. He's going to have to compete. Might be a backup the whole season. Andy Reid likes quarterbacks who can move. Replacing Chase Daniel in Kansas City, good idea. Kellen Kaepernick gets traded from San Francisco. Chip Kelly would be another. As a Baylor alum, I just hope that he makes a smart decision.
I agree with you on that one. And John, we definitely appreciate you joining us again on the Weekly Brew podcast. You're all over the place when it comes to social media. You're on several radio shows. For those listening right now, what is the best place that they can find you?
I'm on Sports Radio 610 in Houston 6 times a week, but it's all different. It's on different days at different hours, so I can be on with all the hosts. I'm on the Titans flagship 3 times a week, Waco, Baylor's flagship twice. I also do weekly shows in Knoxville, St. Louis, Austin, San Antonio, and Corpus because I love doing talk shows. And, of course, Chron.com/sports. That's my real job.
What about Twitter?
Twitter, of course, McClain_on_NFL. That's MCCLAIN. McClain_on_NFL. And I need all the followers I can get.
Hey, we appreciate it, John. Thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure.